inclusive, democratic, and just. We do that. We do that through having engagements during election season and endorsing candidates and then working for those candidates. We also, in between elections, align with advocacy coalitions that match our values and to support improved policies in the District of Columbia. Would love to have more members for DC for Democracy, and before the night is over, we'll make sure that we put information in the chat to help you understand how you can become a member of DC for Democracy. And I'll just say it's super easy. You need to attend a meeting like this, and you also need to go to our website and affirm that you share the values and align with the values of DC for Democracy. And at that point, you're a member, and within 30 days can vote on our endorsements. So I want to start tonight with an acknowledgement that the forum we're having is not exactly what we had planned, even recently. We thought we were going to have a forum with 3 candidates in the Ward 4 race, and in recent days that reduced down to 1. But we are going to make the most of it. We are going to have a really great conversation with the candidate and the incumbent, Councilmember Janeese Lewis George. I will say that in politics, as in many things in life, showing up is really important. And in particular in politics, if you are looking to earn a vote, showing up and being accountable to voters, people who might endorse you, is also really important. So DC for Democracy, we invited 3 candidates to our forum. We had a questionnaire that we sent out to all 3 candidates, and we got a response to our questionnaire from one person, Councilmember Lewis George, and we have one person with us tonight, Councilmember Lewis George. And I think that just says a lot in and of itself. But we are going to continue with our forum as we had planned, to ask the tough questions and have an engaging conversation with Councilmember Lewis George. And with that, I've done enough talking. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful moderator at DC for Democracy. At our forums, we like to lift up the alliances and connections that we have. So Patrice Sulton is the Executive Director of DC Justice Lab, a relatively new organization that is having a substantial impact on the city's criminal legal policy. The DC for Democracy is a member and signed on to the Safe and Free DC platform, which is a Black-led platform for community safety in the District of Columbia. So we're really honored to have Patrice Sulton with us tonight to moderate tonight's forum. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrice.
Thanks so much, Ed. I'm glad to be here. A lot of people have heard of my day job and the interest that I have in policy change, but I'm also personally very invested in civic engagement and political education. I'm thrilled to have been invited to be here this evening, and I'm grateful for everybody from DC for Democracy for submitting questions, designing a questionnaire, and being so engaged in this process. And of course, I appreciate Councilmember Lewis George for being here to answer those questions that were submitted by DC residents. So very excited to get started here. I'm going to go over some of the ground rules for what we're doing together this evening. First of all, the questions that you'll hear are from DC for Democracy, and there are some pre-submitted questions, including video questions that we will play. Each question will have a time limit. Usually it's going to be about 90 seconds. And I may ask some short follow-up questions after we receive those answers. We anticipated doing a lightning round, and we have some short follow-up questions where we're looking for a simple answer, a possible yes or no answer. And so you may hear some of those questions at the end of each remark. The audience members are invited and encouraged to use the chat to engage throughout the evening, respectfully, of course. And if you want to submit new questions for us to consider in the chat, we'd love to try to pick out a few if time permits. So with that, I'm just checking with Ed to make sure there's nothing I missed before we dive in to the first question. I want to give you a second in case we need to do anything with the timer. We're all set?
I think we are all set, yes.
Okay, great. So my first question is if you could please introduce yourself to the DC for Democracy community, as well as the work you've done to make DC a better place and what you would want to do as Ward 4 council member to make it better.
Awesome. Thank you. Good evening, DC for Democracy. Thank you, Patrice, for moderating here. For those who don't know me, my name is Janeese Lewis George. I am a third-generation Washingtonian, born and raised in Ward 4, a proud graduate of DC Public Schools in Howard Law, and a proud dog mom to Sully of Ward 4. It has been an honor to serve my communities these last 3 years as the council member for Ward 4. If we have any Ward 4 residents in the house tonight, drop it in the chat. Look excited to be here with you along with DC for Democracy. I have been proud to work in partnership with DC for D members on many shared priorities, including protecting Initiative 82, the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, the Local Residents Voting Rights Act, getting DC's wealthiest residents to pay their fair share through the 2021 Homes and Hearts Amendment, our fight for DC statehood and the Hands Off DC movement, and of course, the Green New Deal for social housing. When I came here 4 years ago, I talked about the three things, things that I was going to fight for. Among those were affordable housing, excellent schools for every student, comprehensive solutions to community safety and traffic safety. And during my time in office, I've delivered on each one of them, and I've looked forward to discussing my voting record further with you tonight. I've said it for years, and I'll say it again. DC is a very wealthy city, but too many of our neighbors are not part of this prosperity. If we want to make progress on safety, increasing housing affordability, food security, healthcare, and economic justice needs to be a part of our strategy as well. I'm running for re-election because there's more work to do. I fight every day for the people in the community where I grew up, and I work to make a way out of no way because that's what working families do. And I know this is a vision for our future that many DC for Democracy members understand, and I look forward to talking with you about it tonight.
Thank you. We'll move into our next question, and you'll have 2 minutes for this response. Despite over a decade of substantial housing investments, 1/4 of all DC renters and nearly all low-income DC renters spend more than half their income on housing. And the number of severely housing-burdened households has grown over the past decade. Meanwhile, the DC Housing Authority is slow to connect residents with subsidies and is paying unacceptable rents to landlords, attracting those looking to make a buck at the expense of tenants. What are your plans for substantially increasing the number of DC residents with affordable housing, and what do you propose for improving DCHA?
Yeah, thank you. Affordable housing, I think it is an understatement. It's an urgent priority for DC. I have talked about, experiencing displacement myself, my family having to move several times, and just this past year, my family being displaced out of their home in Ward 5 and having to move into another space. So displacement is still impacting Black DC residents every single day. As it relates to DCHA, I was proud to vote against the new DCHA board as a sole council member because I thought dismissing leading advocates and experts didn't help, and I thought it was retaliation in a very real way. Nevertheless, it still passed, and so we need to make sure we're meeting the HUD regulations and hear from tenants and ways to improve the agency. We need to create new tools like the Green New Deal for social housing, which I've introduced twice in this council and look forward to moving forward in the Housing Committee. We have to make changes to the Housing Production Trust Fund and make sure the requirements for that funding are being met and it's producing deeply affordable housing as well as workforce housing. We have the Common Ground Act in my committee introduced by Robert White, but I also have done a lot of work in fighting for our tenants through our Do Right by Tenants Act, which is to hold more, landlords accountable, hold many of our agency accountable, but also make sure that landlords are accountable and are disincentivized from treating our landlords any kind of way. And engage the Attorney General's office like we did in Brightwood Park, where we held landlords accountable for dangerous conditions and won major settlements for them. And I think that's also important. So we're going to have to create new tools like social housing, create more accountability with our Housing Production Trust Fund dollars. And we're going to have to fight for our tenants as much as possible. And that's the work I'm committed to continuing to do.
Thank you. Before the next question, I just want to note what we've mentioned in the chat, which is that We are looking to see if there's a way. Oh, great. I'm glad we've solved this. So if your hand was raised and that was your question, you should now be able to use the chat. We're sorry that that feature wasn't turned on yet. Okay, the council will vote next week on the Secure DC legislation, which tries to address crime by focusing substantially on increased surveillance and criminal penalties. We know that policing and imprisonment in DC have disproportionately harmed Black and Brown people, and that the Council Office of Racial Equity says Secure DC will widen racial inequities. We also know that many DC residents are concerned about violent crime. What parts of the bill do you support, and what parts do you hope to change?
Thank you. DC is in the middle of a devastating public safety crisis, and we urgently need every part of our government to step up and do more to keep our community safe. And as council member, I'm using every tool I have to turn the tide and confront crime with both immediate interventions as well as systemic changes. And we have a mandate from our community to respond in some way. The legislation has some good components to it. The data requirements that came from the Whole Government Response Act. We have the Secure DC, as I know, is 14 pieces of separate legislation all into one piece, about 80 or 90 pages. So when I speak it to some, it's pieces from other people's legislations. We have some good things in addition to that, things regarding making sure strangulation and things that we've heard within domestic violence in our community. We have upgrades. We tried to pass an updated criminal code and was blocked by Republicans, both in Congress and Republicans in DC, and some, secret Republicans who identify as Democrats. Nevertheless, there are pieces of that legislation that within here, an upgrade to some of the terms around carjacking and endangerment of firearm, which I think are good. There are some harmful pieces of it. Obviously, the expanding pretrial detention and making permanent that the DNA collection has some very real concerns. The rollback of police oversight, transparency, and accountability measures are egregious, especially when Director Tobin testified that last year was the highest year for police complaints and police misconduct in the district. And he also testified that many of the provisions that they are trying to roll back under the guise that they are hurting people have not even been funded or implemented yet. And so it's deeply troubling in that regard. So, the good government data collection and better agency coordination and some upgrades to some of the criminal offenses are good. And some of the things we're seeing, are harmful and not based in evidence. I've been working every day, and I'm going to be working every day up until Tuesday to try to reduce the harm that is present in the legislation.
I have a few follow-up questions, and these were in the nature of lightning round questions that I mentioned earlier. So we're hoping for either a yes, no, or a simple answer where possible here. One is, do you support creating drug-free enforcement zones, areas that would be targeted for increased surveillance, and rules that make it easier for police to stop and question residents?
I think that the issue with the drug-free zones is very real, and we know that they don't work. The way the public is perceiving how drug-free zones is going to work is the most troubling thing. So in Ward 4, for example, we have a number of open drug trades corners. If you go to Georgia and Hamilton, if you go to Georgia and Kennedy right now, Longfellow and others, you'll see sort of the open exchange of drugs happening. And I think neighbors who are walking their kids to and from schools every day, and seniors who are walking by are deeply upset and rightfully tired of seeing this. And I think they believe that drug-free zones implementation is going to fix that piece of it. And I think that is sort of the misconception. And so many of them are saying, we want you to vote for this because we want to stop the open drug trades that's happening on our corners, when that's not the solution that is not going to be what happens from this piece of legislation. So I think it's important in talking about drug-free zones to recognize sort of how the community is perceiving and the very real realities of them in neighborhoods every day and how they're experiencing it. With how we reconcile the language within the legislation.
Sticking with one more question on this public safety topic. Do you support banning solitary confinement in the DC jail?
Yes.
Our next question is, income and wealth inequality continue to be wide in DC. The top 0.4% of DC households have nearly as much wealth as the remaining 99.6%. The median Black household income is $54,000 compared with $95,000 for Latino households and $161,000 for white households. What would you do to improve the economic well-being of DC's lowest income residents? And what would you do to build the income and wealth of Black and Brown residents?
Yeah, great question, and really should be the center of conversation here in the District of Columbia. I think in an ideal world, we would put forth and be able to pass and fund a guaranteed basic income. I still believe that we deserve and should have reparations. And so those two would be the most powerful ways of guaranteeing basic income and reparations. In today's world, though, I see improving our tax code and tax justice as the way we do that. And we were able to do that with the Homes and Hearts Amendment. We have established the first ever monthly basic income for DC families. In the Homes and Hearts Amendment, we are fighting through our Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC. We are fighting right now. Councilmember Parker has put forth, and I've co-sponsored with him, a child tax credit. That is a way for us to be able to improve the lives of DC residents and close the racial wealth gap with Black children who are disproportionately in poverty. We have baby bonds, which it looks at investing in Black children's futures. And the other way we do it is through wages. And so some of those fights we've had with Initiative 82, for example, a Black and Brown predominantly field, paying them their rightful wages. The same we've done for Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, raising the wage for early childhood educators, and creating union jobs like we've done in the Green New Deal for housing and lead-free, are how we close the racial wealth gap in this city, and how we have to be very intentional about passing legislation, using our tax code, and raising the wages every way, in every manner and way that we can.
Civic participation, public input, is often devalued in the DC Council through last-minute major budget changes, big omnibus measures that allow bad provisions to sneak in, short turnarounds between votes, and pushing decision-making to the end of the council period. What council rule changes would you recommend for council period 26 to make sure residents can participate more fully?
Oh man, so many. Okay. We have to improve accessibility. It's huge. And so, I have the mayor's office of deaf, blind, and hard of hearing in my committee. We don't do enough for accessibility. I also have the largest Spanish speaking population, hard speaking population in the city. And it is hard for us to get translators for community events and council events. And so we have to do something about the language accessibility. If I had a new rule, it would be that language access and translation is provided at every hearing, and ASL is provided at every hearing. I think it is important that we are able to not have people today. For example, I had the seniors at Hattie Homes who showed up at 8:30 a.m. in the Hattie Homes to testify. We trained them yesterday on how to testify. We showed up today for the hearing. They were there at 8:30 a.m. They never got to testify. The Senior Wellness Center closed at 4 p.m. and we were not done with witnesses, and we had to take breaks throughout. So I would change the way in which we do the sign-up sheets. But when we talk about and bring people in, but I think it is about us going out and encouraging civic participation. I do that with my Listen As We Climb tours that I've been doing in every neighborhood in our ward. I do it in our care days where I bring government to people's doors every month. And I also think policies like fair elections, giving people the chance to run for office who otherwise couldn't. I don't come from a wealthy family. I don't know wealthy donors. I'm a first-generation college student, so the reach is different, but I'm here and the voice from our community because of policies that we put forward also to encourage civic participation.
We are running on time, and I'm going to squeeze in one of the questions from the chat before we move to our next segment here. A reminder that we are looking at the questions in the chat, but if you have your hand raised, we will not have live questions from audience members, so please do write it in the chat. We have questions zooming in on Ward 4 asking, I'm curious about what we can do about all the vacant properties along Kennedy Street and elsewhere. Can we reclaim these spaces for housing?
Yes.
Housing people, sorry.
Yes, absolutely. We have to be reclaiming that space. Kennedy Street, for example, when I first got in office, we had one developer who owned many of those properties and let them sit vacant for years on end. We were able, through public pressure and other means, able to force a sale, and that individual had to sell majority of the properties that he owned on Kennedy Street. And now those properties that have been sold are now actually developing and being made housing. But we got to find more tools, because we also have businesses who have been sitting. For example, 701 Kennedy Street has been sitting. It's supposed to be a pizza shop maybe for the last 7 years. And many of these business owners consider the high taxes and penalties sort of the cost of doing business. And so what we've done, I co-chair Department of Buildings with Chairman Mendelson, and our staff are in a working group on vacant blighted properties, and we are putting together comprehensive legislation to address vacant and blighted properties as a whole, making sure we don't offend any, constitutional issues with takings, but we are looking to introduce some comprehensive legislation around that, because many of the businesses really consider the high taxes the cost of doing business. I've also included and been doing some work at 14th and Hamilton. For example, we've had a vacant blighted house that is horrendous, but also terrible. We were able to refer that to the Insanitary and Condemnation Board, and I looked at expanding their ability to condemn properties so that they can go to use. And so in that regard, we're using all of our tools to be able to deal with some of the vacant and blighted issues we're seeing. It's not just an issue for, the look of a community, but it really does impact our overall community, whether it's through rodent issues, whether it's through the harboring of illicit activities. All of those things matter.
And just one more before we move to the next segment. And sorry that we didn't have the timer up for that last one, but we'll have 90 seconds for this response, which is what should be the relationship between the council and the mayor, and how can it be improved?
I think we should have a working relationship, the council and the mayor, with the council and the mayor, transparency, conversation. And I think, but we also have to realize we are the legislative branch, and they are the executive branch. And with that comes very real checks and balances. And in that, we create sort of what's a natural tension when you do oversight. It creates a natural tension, but I think people have to understand that it's not take offense to sort of you acting in your role. When I do oversight for agencies, I obviously say, we're thankful for your service to the district and the work you do, but these are the ways I need you to improve for district residents. And I think the council has to firmly stand in our role of oversight and accountability, and not allow sort of the executive to take on the legislative role and vice versa. I think the ways we can improve it is through continued open dialogue. We had a council breakfast, mayor breakfast, but those have been skipped for several months on end. We just had one recently, so more conversation and communication. And yeah, I think lack of retaliation, and lack of taking things personally when you are fighting for working families in the district and fighting for your constituents every single day. And to find a common value, which I think we all share the common value of wanting our district residents to feel, live, and be safe and thrive in our city.
So just by way of introduction to this next segment, you will be watching a live video from each member who submitted a recording of their question, and you will have 90 seconds to respond to each question posed. And again, there may be a short lightning round style question after some of these videos. So if you could please turn your attention to the screen that's being shared with you, we'll start with this video from Carla Reed.
Hello, Ward 4 Council candidates. My name is Carla Reed Witt, and I have a question for you. According to the 2022-2023 DC Park scores, 64% of Ward 4 students are not proficient in reading, and 76.3% of Ward 4 students are not proficient in math. The figures are even worse for Black and Latino students in Ward 4. What is your plan to address this? It's urgent.
Go.
You can begin. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Great question. I want to say I'm proud of our Ward 4 schools and the strides we've made. I think it's important for us to de-emphasize teaching to test and teach through cultural understanding and competency. I think we spend so often time having teachers teach to test to be able to meet the impact evaluation system, that we don't spend the time teaching and helping students learn math in the way that they know how to learn math, and the reading in the way they know how to learn reading. So I'm going to continue to advocate for us allowing our teachers to be able to teach holistically and culturally competently, and not having to teach to test. I think we also have to rely on the support of our out-of-time school programs, which is why we introduced universal out-of-time schools. I remember being a DC SCORE student, and when we were learning the poetry portion of DC scores, that was the first time I got excited about reading and about writing, and my reading scores went up because it was a way that I was learning to read in a way that helped me learn and helped me grow. And so continuing to support out-of-time school programs is the way we do that. And in school programs like City Year, I served as a City Year core member in a 7th grade classroom, getting students back on track in reading and in math, and helping in attendance and behavior. And we have to do that in class time as well. And we have to make sure we are investing in the tools that we need to help our children be able to have that repetitive work in math and reading so that they're able to succeed.
Thank you to Carla for that question. Our next question comes from DC for Democracy member Jeremiah Lowry.
Hello, my name is Jeremiah Lowry, and I'm a DC for Dean member. I also work for the Washington Area Bicycle Association. My question for the Ward 4 candidates: what are you doing to make Ward 4 more multimodal, including expanding our bus and bike network throughout the ward to ensure that everyone is able to move around the ward safely and affordably? Thank you. Hello, my name is Jeremiah Lowry, and I'm a DC.
Go.
Thank you.
You said yes, go.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry. Traffic safety is something that is one of my priorities and has been. When I came in office, Ward 4 had one or zero bike lanes, and we have expanded that network greatly throughout the ward. But I think the biggest thing we've done is talk about and help with some of our locations where we've had issues with our seniors, those who are walking. And I fought to include and increase the amount of four-way stops we have, like 5th and Webster, long 13th. 13th and Hamilton. I fought to have traffic lights. Was just the seniors at Colony House could not cross the street on Georgia Avenue. We were able to bring a stoplight to Georgia Avenue and Farragut. I have passed comprehensive legislation, our Safe Routes to School Act. That was me going to every school and assessing where we needed traffic, how we need to make traffic safety improvements. And then I said, you know what, I'm doing this school by school and only by my ward. How about we do something comprehensive? Because every one of our schools deserve a certain, traffic safety improvements have to be a part of all of them, whether speed humps, flashers, ATE cameras in the area, crossing guards being there. And so we've been able to do that, pass and fund Safe Routes to School to improve traffic safety around our schools as well. I've used every tool, whether it was through emergency legislation, permanent legislation, bringing out the news to four-way stops and saying, we need to stop here because there's a crash here every night. And I'm going to continue to be that aggressive and that intentional about traffic safety in my next 4 years.
We have our next video question. I'm loving that people submitted these and are sharing the microphone with us in this way. So you can just answer as soon as the video is over.
Okay, gotcha.
My name is Travis Bally, and I am a proud DC for Democracy member. At the January 17th meeting, the DC Tax Revision Commission decided to take a major departure from its current draft of tax policy recommendations. They abandoned most of the proposals that would make the tax system more progressive and support DC families. Right now, DC has critical spending needs, from WMATA budget shortfall to funding affordable, high-quality early education for every district family. What kind of revenue-generating tax changes, like asking the wealthy to pay a little bit more, will you support?
Awesome. As I said before, I think we have an opportunity through our taxes to bring racial justice to the city. Just recently, I testified the child tax credit. I am set on continuing to make sure we pass the child tax credit here in the district, just like we did the early income tax credit (EITC) to improve tax outcomes in the city. I think we have an opportunity to tax the wealthy more, because we're going to need to in our city. I'm committed to finding a dedicated revenue source, I guess, on to the last question and this current question, a dedicated revenue source for WMATA, because we're going to have to do that. I think there are tons of opportunities, whether it's mansion taxes, et cetera. I've heard proposals to improve business tax policy as well that I'm intrigued about. So I think it's important that we take every opportunity to explore those ways for us to be able to create a more equitable city.
Just as a brief follow-up, you mentioned the mansion tax. Do you support raising property taxes on DC's highest value homes valued at over $1.5 or $2 million?
Yes, if necessary. Yes, if we need to do that to fund, I think we have to do that. Yes.
With that, I'll pass it to another DC for Democracy member, Amanda Wilson.
Hi, my name is Amanda Wilson. I am chairperson of the Taylor Towers Tenant Association. And my question for the Ward 4 candidates is, how would you update and strengthen our city's rent control laws to protect and increase affordable housing and protect tenants and renters? Thank you.
Thank you. I am a huge proponent of updating our rent control laws and continuing to fight for our tenants. We did so recently when we fought against a 12% rent hike for many of our residents who were going to be devastated by a 12% rent hike. I wanted it down to 0 or 3%. We got it down to 6%, and we made it such an impact that Montgomery County also followed through. In early 2023, I fought to limit in addition to exorbitant rent increases for tenants. I also have been able to work in doing legislation around tenants. I mentioned my Do Right by Tenants Act to prevent landlords with unaddressed issues of severe neglect from taking on new properties. In the land of rent control, we're going to have to update, rent by not, the date in which we do it. We're still sort of buildings built before, I believe it's 1976. I would absolutely update that number. I think we should update that number as we look at rent control. And I think we're going to have to address this sooner rather than later. I think we also need to be vigilant that we make sure we're protecting TOPA rights. We already lost TOPA rights for single family renters. We cannot afford to lose TOPA rights for building renters. And so I'm staying vigilant on TOPA and making sure we're protecting that as well.
As a short follow-up there, we had a question. Do you support applying rent control to apartment buildings once they reach 15 years old, including phasing in current buildings that are 15 years or older? I know you partially addressed that, but we had a specific question with a specific number. So I wanted to ask you to respond there.
Yes, I'm open to that. I think that sounds good. I want to run numbers, but I would say yes at the moment, yes.
And we have one more video question.
Hi, my name is Claire. I'm a Ward 4 resident. Thanks to everyone for being part of this forum. I'm a public health professional, and from my view, and I think a lot of research shows that safety is a public health issue. So I want to ask the candidates a question focused on prevention, and that's, what the candidates would do to prevent crime before it starts. A lot of the focus right now is on things that relate to the legal system where there's an intervention after a crime already happens. But I think it's really important to ask what candidates will do to stop crime from a public health approach before it happens, and specifically what the candidates will do to engage with at-risk youth who have the greatest connection right now to the criminal legal system to help them and to stop the cycle of crime. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I think I say you have to have intervention, prevention, and enforcement. And I think oftentimes we focus on the enforcement and not the prevention work. When I think about prevention work, it is meeting the basic needs of individuals. Can I eat, right? Do I have enough so that I'm, James Baldwin has a quote, if I'm starving, you are in danger. How are we addressing in food insecurity? And I've done that through my fight for SNAP and funding SNAP alongside my colleagues. When it comes to meeting basic housing needs, we've done that through Homes and Hearts Amendment when we added additional vouchers to be used through creating social housing and deeply affordable housing. And so housing is important in how we're addressing it. Do I have a place to live? Can I eat? Do I have wages? Can I afford to stay here? And we've done that work by focusing on wages of jobs from domestic workers to early childhood educators and increasing the wages there. Do people have a living wage? Can they live with dignity and work with dignity? It also takes some really intense work in building relationships. In intervention work. I've been able to work with our Cure Violence Interruption program, as well as our One Violence Interrupters, and bring about and have conversations and bring about ceasefires. I've literally participated in ceasefires and had those conversations where we were able to stop crews who were having beefs within our ward from continuing to escalate. And when I did that, I asked on two sides, I said, what would I have to do to get you off the street and not using guns? And the answer was, man, council member, I just need a job. If you get me a job, I won't even be out here. And you know what? We were able to do that for a number of those young men who said that to us. We got them jobs. They are in jobs right now, and they're not participating in dangerous activities. I've done that by, putting funding into our One's Leadership Academy. We have a One's Leadership Academy at Paul, and we funded a Paul one for McFarland, so we can do that intervention work at those ages. I've introduced legislation around conflict resolution and peace studies, because I ultimately believe we should be teaching that at the elementary, middle, and high school level, so students know how to deal with what they are feeling and how to handle conflict. There's no way we should have young people killing each other over sweet and sour sauce. That is a failure on our part. When we talk about the health needs, when we talk about birth to 3 and on and pre-K 3, why those years are so important. It's meeting the health needs of those young people as well, and making sure they are able to live. When I talk about lead in water, I'm talking about it for a reason, because when our young people ingest lead water at a young age, it creates issues of both cognitive behavioral health issues. And so when I look at prevention work, it is how do we make people feel that they are human from a young person perspective, so that they value humanity, to not be involved in acts that lack humanity in their actions. And it's about meeting the needs of residents, and we do that every single day, and have done that, especially here in Ward 4.
Before I move to the questions in the chat, and this is just a reminder for everybody in the audience to get those questions in, I have one more member submitted question along the same lines of the video question that was just posed. Do you support the authorization and creation of 2 no barrier 24/7 harm reduction centers, one on each side of the river, where people could safely use drugs and receive wraparound services, including healthcare, counseling, and referrals to health and social services?
Absolutely. I think we needed it yesterday. I had the opportunity to actually travel to New York City, to On Point NYC, and was set up by Councilmember Tiffany Caban in New York City. I had a chance to go into that center and see the transformative work that was happening. I was with the EMTs that were on site. I saw sort of the safe injection locations. I saw places where people could get massages, places where people could sleep, where they could wash their clothes, where they could wash their hair. They had different levels of therapy, whether it was sort of, through massage, through aromatherapy, through acupuncture. And we desperately need that here in the district. I want our district to be open to safe injection sites, and I want them to be open to harm reduction centers. We have an opioid crisis. We have to act like it. And this is an innovative way to do it. And guess what? Neighbors initially in New York, when they had the On Point NYC, were like, we don't want this in our neighborhood. There were parks across the street. And guess what? Those parks where there used to be, they would say we would collect 15,000 needles in 1 week, are now usable, beautiful spaces for people and families to be and utilize. And that's because they decided to use a tool and take a transformative approach. And I desperately think we need that here in the district.
Okay, we're going to transition to questions that we've received this evening live and in the chat. And I'm going to do my best to read things as they were written and not paraphrase, because I'm worried about capturing the essence of what people wanted to know. So I will begin with, if you could spend less on something in the DC budget, what cuts would you make? Pay for increases that you are passionate about?
Oh, this is a good question. Wow. Oh, okay. Well, we spend a lot. I think, there's a lot of funny that goes through sort of ridiculous things, where we have t-shirts for everything and, bag for paraphernalia for everything, just a total waste of money and a number of sort of, I don't know what we call those expenses that we have. Where do I think the biggest waste of money? Man, we waste money everywhere. We have funding everywhere that needs to be. It's just wasted. I want to say this. I think the human services budget should be the largest budget in the city, and it should get the most resources. And I just am frustrated by the fact that so many of our human services agency is the one always taking the cuts and needing to beg for money. Whether it comes to emergency rental assistance, whether it comes to housing, I just don't understand why our human resources, budget is always under, attack, and always the one having to fight for their funds. So I'm going to say I would like to see human resources be overfunded. And I think that's the place, we should be.
I am so glad that we're getting so many questions in. I'm going to see how many we can do in the next 10 minutes. Many of DC's parks are litter filled and horribly mismanaged and neglected by the National Park Service. Will you prioritize land transfers to DC control? And if so, how?
Great. That's a great question, actually. I introduced legislation around our forested lands to create conservation space within DOEE to deal with our forested lands. But I think I've been working as chair of facilities on dealing with National Park Service land and improvements. I think Ward 4, I would say, has the most Park Service lands that we have to deal with. So I think negotiating land transfers with DGS through with Eleanor Holmes Norton and our congressional partners has to be the way that we do this. There are a number of places and spaces I think we should have, especially since most of our community does the cleaning anyway. When I think about areas over by Fort Totten, my ANC commissioner over there and team does most of the cleaning of that park. And so I think there's an opportunity. Me and Councilmember Parker are working on a land that is in that Fort Totten area about making it a triangle park. And we're working on getting that land, doing that work and having that be a space in place for our community to be able to go in the Fort Totten area. We've Fort Stevens as well. We've had, a number of ways in which we are doing park cleanups, et cetera. But at the end of the day, some of that land could be utilized for parkland here in the district. I will say about regular parks, DPR parks, I've also used my role as facilities chair to do cleanup of our parks. And we actually funded and legislated a 311 for DPR centers. So if you are at a DPR center and you see something broken and not done, you now can do it on 311 as of October. And we put that legislation through. But I will work with my partners in Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, and our superintendent of National Park Service, which I work with closely. We actually just got a new one who is a Ward 4 resident, Brian Joyner. And so I continue to work with him to make that a possibility through my role with DGS and him. Yeah.
I'm cheating a little here to squeeze in an additional question, but you mentioned Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, and I'd like to ask if you could speak to the relationship between council members and our representation on the Hill. I think a lot of people have been talking about and have been concerned about congressional interference, and I'd like to give you 90 seconds to speak to what you would do as Ward 4 council member in that regard.
Thank you. So we've done two things. I do communicate with Councilmember Eleanor Holmes Norton and her staff, and they have been phenomenal because we and her have to work together a lot because we have so much National Park Service land. I think Councilmember Henderson suggested when we first got started in the council, like we need somebody lobbying on the council's behalf. The chairman finally took heed and hired a lobbyist for the council on the Hill. To be able to advocate and strategize on the issues that are impacting DC residents. And I think that's critical and important. And we have to do that level of work. And I want to see more coordination. As you know, a number of our issues that we face as a district in both the public safety sector, but in the in our National Park Service land areas, are impacted by our lack of statehood. And so having federal partners and having people listening to us and paying attention to us and us strategizing on the Hill is important. And, I can't emphasize enough why our lack of statehood hurts us and how it hurts us as a district, and the incredible way, we are undermined by us not being able to pass laws and do the work in our city the way we want to do them.
We have a few questions here that are related that I'm going to try to combine. One is, share with us what legislation you've introduced that positively impacts the thousands of senior citizens in Ward 4 currently and in the future. And the second question is, do you support reducing taxes for senior citizens who are on fixed income?
Yeah, great question. Things that have impacted seniors and their ability to stay in the district. I can just start with SNAP first and foremost. I know people think of SNAP as just families, but one of the largest group of SNAP recipients here in our city, another large group are our seniors. And part of the reason why I fought so hard for SNAP benefits was because I had seniors telling me that they were down to $44 a month, and that was it. And that was a huge issue that we were able to, face, and we're going to still face coming forward. A big issue, I do care days in my community where I knock doors. And when I go into my senior homes, I also see sometimes when I go in there and talk to them, I'll open the refrigerator and they won't have any food there. So coordinating food drop off has been of huge importance. I think the other thing is housing. We had a program in the district for single family rehabilitation. It was not staffed sufficiently. It was not funded sufficiently. And we had seniors on that list who passed away. Actually, on that list, there was a Washington Post article about it. I fought to get the amount of employees that were necessary, fill those vacancies and increase that funding so that our seniors can age in place in that location. The work that I have done around rent hikes was for our seniors. When seniors were facing a 12% rent hike, many of them are on fixed incomes. And so when I was fighting against rent hikes, it was because I knew that some of our seniors on fixed income could not afford a 12% rent hike moving forward. And it's why rent control is so important, and expanding rent control is so important, because it impacts our seniors and how they are treated, and the work that they have happen. On a ward level, I have worked in supporting our senior villages. We have 2 in Ward 4, and funding and making sure they had the funding that is necessary. And I do what is called a senior jubilee every year. When the budget first comes out, I want our seniors to know how to take advantage of the resources into them. And so I bring all the agencies that serve seniors to Ward 4 and to our seniors, so that they, when that money hits, my seniors are ready to engage and get that money. And then lastly, our home health aides. Many of our seniors, we have a home health aide shortage in the district, and we need to do more in that area. And so increasing the amount that home health aides make is a way to attract more home health aides and get that work. And within our committee, in my family services committee, we were able to increase the wages for home health aides and the amount that they allocated needed there. And so in those ways, I have shown up for seniors, in addition to traffic safety that deals with the pedestrian issues that we have, and fighting for stoplights, stop signs, et cetera.
It's so tough to narrow this down in our last few minutes here. I apologize to anyone whose questions we didn't reach. I'm going to choose 2 or 3 last questions. One reads, I've worked in charter schools where teachers make less than $50,000 a year, while CEOs make over $200,000. I've worked in charters where ceilings collapse during the school day, in schools without opening windows or HVAC, with locked bathrooms because of failed plumbing. What is your plan to increase oversight of DC's charters and empower teachers, families, and students?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We have so many great charters operating in Ward 4. We have a large amount, and they do a phenomenal job with families here. I think in every legislation that I have put forward for in our city, I've made sure to include our charters within that, whether it was locks and doors, whether it was safe routes to school. All of those things are ways in which to do that. I think our charter teachers, deserve to have more transparency. And so continuing to push for more transparency, especially around wages and how that is done. When we were raising wages, we did find funding in the council budget to raise wages for charter teachers as well. And I know we don't handle facilities in the same way, but continuing to voice when there are facilities concerns. The other ways I've done it is we have safe passage programs in the ward, and I've made sure that the charter schools who are in the same safe passage areas are covered. So for example, when I fight for Roosevelt and McFarland, I'm also fighting for E.O. Haynes and Brea. When I'm fighting for Coolidge and Ida B. Wells. In those schools, I'm also fighting for Capital City, who's also nearby, and others, and safe passage for DC bilingual as well. So, I think it's important that in every legislation we put forward in the Education Committee, that we demand transparency in the charter sector, because they are getting public dollars and they should be held to that same standard. And in the same ways that I show up for our DCPS schools, I show up for our charter schools and make sure my legislation is inclusive of them, and the real resources their students deserve and need in our ward as well.
There's one I think I can squeeze in 10 seconds, and that is, should ANC commissioners be compensated?
Absolutely, they should be compensated. We need to do more by our ANC commissioners. I am incredibly grateful to have some of the best ANC commissioners in this city, many of whom are mentors to me and support me, and I learn from them. I don't lead by myself, and I'm proud to lead with an incredible group of public servants who care deeply about our city.
We are going to give you just a moment to switch from answering all of these questions. Thank you for letting us hop around more quickly than we would have if we had a fuller panel. But I want to give you an opportunity for a closing statement, and we'll set the timer for that and give you just a second to situate. For anybody who's following along as she's adjusting, if you could please notice in the chat, there is a link there for you to become a member of DC for Democracy. Please take advantage of that and please follow along on social media to keep up with their work at DC4D. Okay, back to you, Councilmember Lewis George.
Thank you. As I started, it's been incredibly the honor of my life to serve my home ward and my home city. And it's been incredible to do it alongside many of the people from DC for Democracy. I have fought incredibly hard for working families, whether it's our tenants, whether it's our workers, whether it's our teachers and our schools, our young people, our seniors, our food insecure neighbors. This is what I wake up and think about every single day. How can I achieve more for working families in our city? I'm incredibly proud of my record, but I'm not taking anything for granted in this election. I know corporate interests are coming for me, landlords and developers who are upset that I call out their practices in some of our buildings and making sure that our families have sanitary and living conditions are upset. School, big business, school privatizers alike. And we are already seeing these attacks, and they will likely only get more intense. These corporate interests won't want to stop opportunity for working families by any means necessary, including using fear taxes that keep us afraid. They are not interested in our safety. They're not interested in making our communities better or stronger. They want us to be divided and afraid because that's how they win. Yes, we face extremely challenges right now, but I believe deeply we can only overcome the challenges we face by working together. I go to war for my ward every single day and for working families in this city, and that's what I continue to do. I have fight left in me, and I want to fight with you for working families, for district residents every single day. If so, please join me in this fight for our city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you again for your participation, and again, thank all of the members of DC for Democracy who showed up tonight, stayed engaged, helped with submitting questions, recording videos, and participating in the discussion that's leading up to a really important vote in our city. I do see the question in the chat about the other candidates. I'm going to let Ed address that when he comes back on screen, but I just wanted to leave you with my heartfelt thanks for the time, the thought and care that went into tonight's event. Very much appreciated on my end.
Well, that was an amazing, rich conversation. We covered a lot of material in the last hour. Councilmember Lewis George, thank you so much to Patrice Sulton for doing an amazing job moderating this event. Thank you so much to Councilmember Lewis George for being here. I don't know if we have options in this for people to applaud, but I know everyone is applauding, and I really appreciate all the questions from the chat as well. Question about the other candidates. I will just say that we invited 3 candidates to come to this forum, and we thought we had 3 candidates coming, and then in the last week, since last Saturday, 2 of them pulled out, and said they had conflicts, and we will just leave it at that because we had a really amazing conversation tonight. And this isn't the first time DC4D has had a candidates forum where only one person showed up. And as I said, showing up is important, and I hope you all take that into account. I want to leave by letting you know that if you are a member of DC for Democracy, you've been a member for 30 days, we are going to have an endorsement meeting on February 13th. We'll send out information about that, and that is a chance for you to come and speak for a minute on behalf of a candidate that you care about. And after that evening, we will send out electronic ballots so that we can do an endorsement. When we endorse candidates, we go and work for them, knock doors, etc. We also will have a conversation at the February 13th meeting with a pro and con presentation around Initiative 83, the Make All Votes Count DC initiative, ballot initiative, which would bring ranked choice voting to the district and create open primaries, allowing independents to vote in a primary of their choice. So we really look forward to seeing you on February 13th for our endorsement conversation and then participating in our endorsement vote. We will send emails out about our Ward 7 and 8 and at-large forums, which will be coming up later this spring. With that, I just want to thank you again so much for being with us tonight and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.